Well, hello, my friends. Today I am taking a couple of thrift store finds and giving them a fresh, hand-painted look the easy way. Welcome to my channel. Let's get started. This first one is this really nice solid wood round that somebody made into a tray. They have those little handles on there. I'm going to go ahead and take those off, fill the holes with some Durham's water putty, and then get everything sanded down so that it will be prepared for paint. And I will be leaving a list of everything I used for today's projects in the description box with links to those products. With the Durham's water putty, I put a little bit into a small cup and add some water and then mix it up. You can add more or less water or powder depending on how thick you want this to be, so you just mix it to the consistency that you want for your project. Then I can just press that down into the holes and kind of smooth it out. And once it's dry, it will be ready to sand with the rest of this wood round. I'm also going to be adding this into some of the indentations, like where the knot holes are, because I would like this to have as smooth of a surface as possible. When it was completely dry, I took it out to the garage and used my orbital sander to take off as much of that finish as I could. Now here's how it looked after I sanded it front and back, and I'm going to give it 2 coats of shellac so that when I paint I won't have any of those tannins showing through. When the shellac was dried, I'm going in with Fusion's Parchment, and I'm going to give this a couple of coats. I'm only going to do the top part for now. I'm going to paint the back of this later because in the process of all the other things I will be doing, the back would end up getting messed up with, the paint and crud that gets on my mat and on my table. So for now, I'm just painting the top and the sides as well. Now you'll notice I'm able to spin this around because I have it on my little Lazy Susan. For a project like this, it comes in so handy and they are so cheap on Amazon. I will leave a link in the description box for one in case you're interested. To me, it's a game changer. I use the little Lazy Susan all the time. Now I ended up getting a lot of brush strokes on the front of this. I don't know if it was the brush I was using. Probably it wasn't a good quality brush. So I decided to go in with my little sponge and try to smooth those out a little bit by just sponging on another coat of paint. However, that really didn't make much difference and it just made more texture. So I ended up sanding that back a little bit before going on with my stamps. These are the IOD Sunflower Stamps. I'm going to be putting these on first. I'm going to figure out my arrangement and tape off some areas and then apply these to this wood round. And then I will be painting over these stamps. I'm using some painter's tape just to mark off that edge so that it will help me when I go to lay this down with the ink on it. It gives me a guideline so I know where to place my stamp. I'm using Stays on ink in the color Jet Black. Now I had a couple of issues here. Number one, my ink pad was low on ink, so I did not get great coverage on this. And because it's a large stamp, by the time I got it inked and up there and positioned where I wanted it, the ink was already starting to dry. So I did not get a good impression the first go around. So when I take this off, I realize that I'm going to have to go back and redo it. So I inked it up again and tried to get it back in the exact same position. These, with all the petals and everything, this was a difficult stamp to do this technique with. And this is actually the first time I have done this technique with paint. I've done it before with just coloring in with wax, but that was a lot easier. Um, it's just, this is a difficult pattern to work with for this particular technique. So keep that in mind. You might want to use something a little simpler than I did. The second stamping was a little bit better, but I immediately got online and ordered a refill for my black ink because I knew that this just wasn't going to work out with my dried out ink pad. So now I'm placing down my second stamp, giving myself the little guidelines, and I have the mask of the first stamp I did already in place so that I can put this stamp down and it will appear as if those upper petals are coming out from behind the larger sunflower that I already stamped. Now with those two done, I'm going on with my third one. And this one didn't require a mask onto the other sunflowers. It's going to stand alone by itself. In fact, I didn't get this one down as close to the edge as I wish I would have. And I do decide to go in and fill in that right hand bottom side a little bit because of that. So I'm going to put the mask of this one over and then just re-ink up that bottom section on the right hand side and move it over a little bit and stamp that so it kind of fills that space in a little bit. I ended up letting this ink dry overnight and now it's time to paint. I'm starting with the center of the sunflowers using traditional burnt umber and a medium color of brown so that I can get some variation in the colors in the center of my sunflowers. This is just kind of like a paint by number thing. Just fill in all your little sections. You can go over the original stamp. I use a little bit of water with my acrylic paints so that it's still somewhat see-through, even though it's okay if you cover up most of that original stamping, because we're going to stamp over this once we're done painting, and it will re-outline and define all those details. I started with the darker brown, and then I will go in with the lighter brown to just lighten things up a little bit. Once this dries, it ends up being a lot darker than I wanted it to be in order to have the stamp show up when I restamp it. So I wanted to give that center a little bit, like I wanted the darker brown behind and then the lighter brown on top. So right now I'm just going in with that dark brown. And this is the brush I'm using, which worked really well. It's a Filbert. I just thought I would show you that, so in case you want a brush that works really well for this kind of project. You can get those at any art store or Hobby Lobby or wherever, and there's all different levels, like if you're a true artist or if you're a beginner, like the different quality of brushes, but the shape of it works really well. So now I'm taking that lighter brown and I'm sponging that on with a little sponge dauber. Now I'm using burnt sienna to add some of that reddish, orangish color. And for this, I'm using just this flat brush. And I'm going to go in around the edge of the center of the sunflower, starting overlapping that dark brown just a little bit and then dragging it out onto those petals, and that will be all blended in with the yellows that I use for the petals. This actually isn't difficult. You just pull up a picture of the item that you're wanting to duplicate, and it's just a general idea. It doesn't have to be exact. You just get the basic colors down and go for it. Like it's really not that difficult. So now I'm using a couple of shades of yellow. One's more of a golden color. I end up going with three different yellows, dark, brighter, and then one that's kind of um, just different. You'll see it when I get to it. I'm starting with the darkest color. I'm going to go over all those petals with this one and then blend in the lighter color called Butter. You can see that I'm adding that after I've partially put the dark gold on, and now I'm adding that butter to it while it's still wet so that those two colors kind of seamlessly blend together. And that's how I'm going to do all my petals. I go back and forth sometimes between the two colors until I get the look I want. So it's just something that you can totally have fun with and just play with until you're happy with it. I took a little of the light butter color and added that more at the base of that center to kind of add some highlight. Like you just go for it and have some fun. So now here's where I come in with my third yellow called Golden Straw. And I'm just using this to add another light layer of color to give this more interest. I'm just kind of lightly going over all the petals, sparingly adding this just to add a little more dimension to my petals. Now with that first one done, I'm going to do the same exact thing to the other two. Now that my petals are all done, I'm taking that lighter brown called Bark Brown and sponging that over the centers so that the stamping will show up a little better. But before we move on to that, I'm going to lay my stamp down and see where I need to do some touch-ups. So you can see here that I completely missed this spot because the stamp didn't transfer down there. So I'm just going to lift that up and ink that little edge so that I have an outline to fill that in. I still wasn't happy with the color of my centers, so I used a color called Nutmeg to lighten them up a little bit more. I decided that I wanted to add a little bit of almost like a shadow effect along the lines in the center of those petals. So I'm using that original kind of dark golden color to go over the stamped lines in the petals so that when I re-stamp over it, it will just have a little bit of that darker color behind it and will give it kind of a shadowed effect. When that was dry, it's time to re-stamp. I decided to do this larger one in halves. So I'm going to do that top half first, I have all my little tape helping me to guide this. This is a big stamp, and I didn't trust my ability to be able to get it completely lined up perfectly, because now I'm trying to restamp exactly over the original stamp that I did, and I felt more comfortable just doing it one half at a time, hoping that I would line it up correctly. So then I removed that and I stamped, or I inked up the bottom half, and then placed that down on there. I actually had to do the top half twice because I didn't have enough ink on there. So now I'm doing the bottom half. So I have all those guidelines from the first half I did to help me line it up. This is the hardest part, is getting, especially with this type of stamp with all those details, getting it lined up perfectly. It's more difficult. The thing that I had made before, where I used this stamp, but I went over it with wax instead of paint. I didn't restamp it. I just did a light coat of wax, so I didn't have the difficulty of restamping like I did on this one. So this was a first for me. I felt confident enough in doing the second one all in one fell swoop. And these didn't turn out perfectly, but they turned out pretty good. So, you know, this is my first time doing this with the painting over it and then restamping it, and it didn't turn out that bad. So, you know, don't lose hope. You can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. As you can see with this one, when I pull it up, no, not a good impression. Got to do it again. And just make sure you remember to put your mask back down when you do your second stamping. So now on this third one, remember I did that little extra part that I filled in on the bottom. So I do the original stamp first, and then I pull that off, re-ink just that little bottom portion that I have to redo on the bottom where I filled in. And that will complete the second stamping of this project. Now I have some sections where I got a little blotch of ink that didn't belong, and areas where some of the ink was a little thicker than I wanted it to be. So I decided to just take my little finger sander and basically just kind of sand over most of this, concentrating on the areas where the ink was too heavy and I thought it looked out of place. So I'm basically just distressing the whole thing with some sandpaper, some very fine grit sandpaper. You want to be careful because it will easily remove your acrylic paint. And now I'm taking that parchment paint that's the original color of the board, and I'm going around and just filling in all the little areas where when I sanded that ink, it kind of like stained my some of the areas of the wood round. So I wanted to touch that up and make everything nice and clean, and also go around and touch up any areas where I was out of the lines with my acrylic paint so that it would look a little more uniform. For the edges of this, I'm using my antique wax. I'm just going to paint this on to the edge, being very careful to not get it onto the top of the wood round. Painting this on and then wiping it back with the cloth. I hadn't intended to do the back side with the antique wax, but when I was doing this, I did get some of it on the back. I was really concentrating on not getting it on the top of it because I did not want that. I wanted a nice white top. And so just in the process of doing this, it kind of overlapped onto the back a little, and to me it just looked messy. So I went ahead and added the antique wax onto the entire back as well. And in the end, I actually like that better than I think I would have if I had left it white. So here's where I'm showing you how it just kind of came over the edge. And now I'm going to go ahead and cover the entire back with that antique wax. Same thing, brushing on and then wiping back. Now I'm going to give the front of this 2 coats of my Duraclear matte varnish. This will seal all that paint in and give this some great protection. Now onto some feet for this. I am taking some round wood knobs that I got, I believe, off of Amazon. You can also get these at Hobby Lobby. And I've got them on a skewer to paint them so that they will give me something to hold on to. I'm using that parchment paint that I used on the tray. And now once that's dry, I'm using my antique wax to go over that so that they will match the edge and back of the tray. I really thought about doing a Lazy Susan out of this. I think it would have been perfect for that, but I was just like, I looked up the mechanism for Lazy Susan and I was like, oh, now I need a base, and then I have to figure out how to screw it onto the base and onto the tray. I was just like, oh, I just can't do this right now. So maybe a future project I will figure that out. So for now I'm going with these little feet. I'm using E6000. Once I got these all laid out where I wanted them, I just picked each one up, put a little pencil mark so I would know where to put it back down after I put the glue on, grabbing my little ruler to make sure that I've got it in the right spot. And then once I have, and I'm just doing E6000, I'm not adding any hot glue or anything. So once I get these all on there and they're evenly placed, I'm going to put a cutting board on top of this with some weight on it. And when I did that, I noticed that it was wobbly. And I didn't know if it was the cutting board or if my feet were actually not even, like, one of them wasn't the right size, or maybe my board was slightly warped or something. But you can see here that I'm like, oh, right there. See, no, it's wobbly. So what I did was I weighted it down and I let it sit for about an hour so that I could turn it over and check it on the table. And when I did, it was definitely wobbly. So now I need to fix that. So I'm taking this little hang tag because the thickness of it was just right to fix the wobble. I'm going to cut off a little piece with my little miter shears and then cut around it with my scissors and get it, then use some sandpaper to make it more of a round shape to fit on top of that foot that I tore off before the glue had completely set. I tore that off, and then see, I did this with that little wooden tag, and now I'm going to glue that on the top of that knob, which is actually the bottom. And then once that glue has set, I'm going to glue this back on, replace the weight, let this sit overnight, and then I can come in and touch that up with my antiquing wax. That way it matches the rest of the bottom of the tray and the feet. So, crisis averted, and here's how this one turned out. On to the next project. This little picture that I picked up at Goodwill really had a little story behind it that I found out once I started to clean it up. So I was soaking it in the sink with some hot soapy water, and I noticed that the paint was just peeling right off. I think it was chalk paint, and that's why it was coming off so easily. But what I noticed was underneath was obviously some sort of decoupage or decal or something that was on there that had been painted over. So since it was coming off quite easily, I went ahead and just scraped and scrubbed so that I could get all of that off and start fresh with the bare bones. And here's how it turned out after I cleaned it up. I gave it a coat of my Rust-Oleum 2X primer in flat white so that my paint would adhere well. I'm going to use Dixie Belle's Chalk Mineral Paint in the color Buttercream and Palmetto. I'm going to mix these two colors together until I get the shade that I want for this picture. Once the color was to my liking, I went ahead and started painting this with a flat brush to get under that top lip, and then I could go in with a bigger brush to finish painting. I went ahead and gave this 2 coats of this color. I avoided painting the handle and the pour spout, with the exception of the inside there, because I wasn't sure what color I wanted to do those. So I thought I would just wait until I had this part done and then I could decide. I'm using IOD's paint inlay from Melange. It's this artichoke one. Oh man, you guys, I just wanted to use this so bad on something. I don't know why, but it was, to me, it was just like, oh, summer, vegetable. So I cut this out and I'm just using my pencil to kind of mark some spots so that when I get my paint on there to lay this into, I will know exactly where to put my paint and where to lay it on. So since the original coats are dry, now I'm going in with a fresh liberal coat of that same color so that I can lay my paint inlay into it. Before I lay it down, I do mist it with a little bit of water on the back side, not on the side that goes into the paint, but on, I guess, so it would be the front side. Um, and then I'm just laying that down and pressing it into that wet paint. And then I will get out my brayer and press that down a little bit better. And then I will go over the areas with a damp cloth to make sure I have everything moistened and pressed down into that fresh paint. Now, once that's done, you can let this dry just on its own, or you can apply a little heat like I did with my little Sizzix heat gun to help it dry a little faster. Once it's dry, you remist it with the water, let it sit for a minute, and then you can peel off the inlay and look at the yumminess of this. It turned out so good. The only hiccup I had was it tore on that right hand side, and so I had to remove that piece separately. But oh my gosh, this turned out so good. I absolutely love it. I have this one little spot right there that it didn't completely transfer on. So what I'm going to do is wipe that off. This is just paint. So you could even manipulate this paint like with a paintbrush and, change it if you want. Like, I don't know, it's just kind of hard to explain. But so what I did was I wiped off what was on there, and then I added some more paint and then reapplied that little section of that paint inlay, doing the same process, getting it wet, letting it dry, then getting it wet again and taking it off so that it would reapply that little section that didn't completely adhere. So once that was completely dry, I'm going in with that same original color to kind of fill in around those areas where I had cut around that inlay. There's just a little bit of difference in the, how to explain, from the outline of where I cut, you could see that the paint was like, I guess you could say thicker on the inlay. So I'm just adding extra paint in around all those areas to help disguise that, and then to bring in some texture to further disguise any of the lines from that paint inlay, and then then completely across the entire picture. I'm using my little sponge dauber to sponge that original color on there. Here I'm using a smaller one to get in all those little tight areas, just to add some texture so that it all blends together and it's not so noticeable. And it just kind of gives it, I don't know, it just kind of gives it a better look to have some texture on there. Now I'm taking my Dixie Belle Chalk Mineral Paint in the color Caviar to, I finally decided what color I wanted. I figured it would be black, but I thought maybe I'd want to do something else. And I'm going to go ahead and paint the inside and the pour spout and the handle in this color. The hardest part of this was painting the inside of this picture. It's any of these narrow spaces are just really difficult to reach with your regular brushes that we all have. So you just got to be patient and know that in the end it'll be worth it. So I'm going to go ahead and give all those parts 2 coats, let that dry, and then we'll be on to the next step. I'm also going to paint the bottom rim the same caviar color. And then even though I painted the bottom the original palmetto and buttercream color, I do go over that with the black as well, just to tie this all together. When all that was dry, I am going in with my Jolie finishing wax in clear over the entire picture, inside, outside, bottom, handle, everything. This will prepare the black surfaces for some antiquing wax, and it will seal the other surfaces that I'm not going to do anything else to. So I brush all that clear wax on there and then wipe it back with the cloth. Now onto my antiquing wax. I'm only putting this on the areas that I painted black, which is the inside, the little pour spout, and the handle and the bottom of the pitcher. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to brush that on and then wipe it back with the cloth. This will give it kind of a more rich, rustic look to the black, almost like it's on the verge of rusting. Now on the handle and the rim of the pitcher, originally I just painted this on and then wiped it back, but I had a little spot there where the paint had actually come off. So after I did the original paint on and wipe back, I went back and added extra antique wax to the handle and to the rim of the pitcher, and I just let it dry as is. I did not wipe it back because I wanted that little extra oomph of that color and that vintage look to it. And I really liked the look that that gave me. And while I was adding this finishing touch here, I realized that I did not even paint the inside or outside of that little pour spout with the antique wax, so I had to go ahead and add that, wipe it back. But again, I did not wipe back the rim or the handle of the antiquing wax. So now to make a hang tag, I've got this little wooden one from Amazon, and I'm painting it in that same color that I did the picture. I'm going to reuse this inlay that came off of my picture. So I'm going to put another coat of that paint on there, lay the inlay on there after getting it spritzed with some water, lay that down, let it dry, remist it, pull that off, and it just wasn't very impressive. I thought more of that green paint would show up onto that tag, but it did not. So I dried it and then I sponge painted some of that original color over it, and then I painted the back of it black, the caviar color from Dixie Belle. And then I went over that with some of the original picture color and some dark brown to make it look kind of grungy and interesting. And now for the front of it, I'm going to use this little sticker I got from Temu. This is what the package looks like. And then I'm also going to use these little butterflies that I got from Temu. And this is what that package looks like. I'm using Fabri-Tac glue for this. I'm going to take that backing off the sticker and place it over my tag, trim off the excess, and then glue it down with the tacky glue so that it will adhere better. Now I'm going to attach these two butterflies together. I layered them so that it would be more interesting. And then I'm going to apply those to my tag. I'm using my finger sander to remove the excess of that sticker off. It's a little more effort than when you're dealing with like decoupage paper, because this is actually kind of like a vinyl or something, whatever those stickers are made out of. I'm going to reestablish the hole with my hole punch and then take my StazOn ink and jet black and go around those edges. Now I'm going to use a piece of this paper covered wire from Hobby Lobby. I thought this might be a nice change of pace. I usually use jute twine to tie my tags on to my items. So I wrap it around the tag and hold it up there to see how far down I want it to hang. And then I wrap it around itself again so that it will stay in place. And then I wrap it around the top of the handle. And then I take each end and wrap it around a pencil so it makes a little curlicue. Just something different. Like we often do this, like for pumpkins, how you make their tendrils. I'm just doing that to just make it more interesting for this particular piece. I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. I really do appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope that you find my content useful. Will consider subscribing to my channel or giving me a like. But more importantly, I hope I've inspired you to go create something. See you next time.